Wayne's World. Hello, welcome to Healthcare Triage Live. I'm told we are now live. Welcome. We appreciate you joining us. We've already had tons of questions which people have submitted, but I talk pretty fast, so it's very likely we'll get through lots of them. So if you have more, continue to tweet them to hashtag HCT questions or post them live in the comments right below the video here, which Stan and Mark are actively monitoring. So let's begin. First question comes from Midnight SG. There's so much dispute over multivitamins for adults and kids. Some say they're worthless, others say they're essential. I'm pregnant and there seems to be no dispute over me taking a prenatal. Why? Few questions there. Let's start at the back with the prenatal one. The reason that there's really very little debate for the prenatal vitamins is that there's a ton of evidence that shows that making sure you have adequate folate levels is very important for the development of the spinal cord of your baby. Folate, great. Too many women don't, and that alone makes the prenatal vitamins plus which contain the recommended amount of folate essential. Nobody's arguing about that. So you are in a special situation where there are enough people who have a deficiency of one vitamin that making sure that we get it makes things better in a real significant and very lasting and important way. So that's not disputed. However, when you were asking about multivitamins for kids and adults, very different question. Essential, almost never, because even people who don't eat great diets in America still get a pretty large amount of food. And they still get a decent amount of vitamins. Most people, the vast majority, are not vitamin deficient. And so you will see sometimes where we will want to give certain kids vitamin D if they're like breastfeeding and they're young and they're not getting enough, or certain adults who have significant deficiencies in something where we supplement them, but they are rare. Most people don't need a multivitamin. There have been no great studies that show that for the vast majority of people that multivitamins are correcting any kind of vitamin deficiencies or diseases. There are a few large studies which conflict, which look at the use of multivitamins to prevent cancer and to do things, and like I said, they conflict. Some of them have positive outcomes and some of them do not. So because of that, if you want to take a multivitamin and you're an adult and you're doing it for that reason, then so be it. They're dirt cheap. You can buy them by like the barrel at Costco, and they're just not that expensive. You can get a generic, and I'm totally fine with it. Because the downside really is cost. It's just how much money you would be spending. There's very little risk in taking a multivitamin. This does not hold true for supplementation with individual vitamins, which you can take too much of certain vitamins. They cost a fortune, and because often they're unregulated, as we've discussed many times in Healthcare Triage and supplements, you're never quite sure what you're getting. So I'm not as keen on supplementing individual vitamins. But if you want to take a general multivitamin, so be it. The harms just really aren't there. Next question comes from Charlotte Burnside. I have recently been told by a woman that there are all these studies about bras causing breast cancer. Have you heard of any? Is she just a fearmonger? Sounds awfully suspicious to me. It sounds awfully suspicious to me too. Yeah, she's a fearmonger. Oh, come on. First of all, I'm pretty sure we did this in one of our books. I can't remember which one it was, but this is a myth. I think the first or the second one. And you should buy all my books. This is a total myth. If this was not true, if this was not a myth, if this was true, we would know it. They would be shouting it from the rooftops and no more women would be wearing bras. This is so clearly not true. The idea somehow that pressure or that holding them up or squeezing them somehow is linked to breast cancer, and there's no science, no evidence behind that. There have been good studies on this, amazingly enough. We've cited them in books. She's a fearmonger. I've heard of these. Don't worry about it at all. Next question, Ikuwan. What are your thoughts on breastfeeding? Are the benefits overhyped? Are the recommendations 6 months exclusive practical? Actually, the recommendations are like 2 years, not just 6 months. So those are multiple questions. What are my thoughts on breastfeeding? Breastfeeding for babies is awesome. That is natural. It's what sort of was intended evolutionarily. Every other mammal breastfeeds their infants. We're meant to breastfeed babies. I think that there's reasonable epidemiologic evidence that breastfeeding is great. That it actually might confer some immunologic strengths that formula won't. Certainly nutritionally, it's exactly what babies need at the beginning of life. There's less strong evidence that it has lasting effects, that it really reduces problems globally. And even when those effects are seen, they're small. They might have large relative benefits, but very small absolute benefits. I was formula fed. I turned out just fine. I think, lots of babies are formula fed. I think if, when I'm advising parents and moms on what to do as a pediatrician, I think breastfeeding is better. But you certainly don't want to demonize people who formula feed. The differences can be incremental in many cases. And sometimes, as you point out, it's not feasible to breastfeed for long periods of time. That's the way society is. I mean, people go back to work now. Moms go back to work a lot of the time. It becomes very hard to pump that much breast milk and, freeze it and do it. And sometimes the use of formula is fine. But, if you ask me which I'd prefer that people breastfed longer at birth and for a more exclusive period of time. But it's not such a big difference that it's worth demonizing anyone for making a personal choice. Next question. If it worked, I think it'd be awesome. But at this point, we're still not there yet. There's the idea that we could basically improve certain disorders by inserting something into the body which would change gene flaws or gene mutations that would improve health. It sounds great in theory. It's just not really happening yet broadly. I mean, if it did, we'd all know about it again and we'd be doing much more. So it's still sort of in that experimental, borderline working stage. And so I love it in theory, but in practice, it's just not there yet. Next question is Dawson J. What's the fastest, most effective method source for helping anti-vaxxers learn the truth in your opinion? There is no fast, simple way to do this. Even as we've covered, I think both in Healthcare Triage and, as I've written about on my blog many times, part of the problem is that when you confront high information people with factual information that shows that they're wrong, it often causes them to entrench. This has been shown in randomized controlled trials, a lot of it done by Brendan Nyhan, who's a political scientist at Dartmouth and writes for the Upshot at the New York Times along with me. You just can't confront them. You can't just sort of attack and try to do this. And presenting them with factual information often backfires. So there's a lot of theory, unfortunately, not a lot of science that shows how we can change people's minds in this. It's often by trying to appeal to their altruism, that this is benefiting not just themselves or their kids, but benefiting society. Sometimes that works, sometimes making personal connections, but what it really needs is slow, steady, sympathetic talking. There is no fast, most effective method. There just isn't. Fixing this is going to be small. In fact, I'm writing a piece right now that I'm hoping to turn into JAMA this week, which talks about a lot of this. Next question is the sna. I think I'm pronouncing that right. The sna. Is the silver chloride. Is the silver chloride and antiperspirants harmful? If yes, are there alternatives? Well, first of all, I'm not positive that there's silver chloride in antiperspirants. There's often magnesium in antiperspirants. But whatever is in the antiperspirants is just fine. Lots of concerns, much like the bras, that antiperspirants cause breast cancer, that the magnesium backs up, that it blocks up the lymphatic system. None of it is true. It is all myths. It is all covered in our books again. Antiperspirants are not going to give you breast cancer. They are not harmful. They are ubiquitous, and everybody's doing just fine. So don't feel the need to go and look for alternatives. If they're working out for you, you're going to be just fine. Next question. Eponine, you guys have the hardest freaking name. What is it? Eponine Thenardier, and there's 2 accent marks over those, so I'm positive I'm mispronouncing those. Does the pill have any side effect for later in life when you would like to have children? I assume you're talking about birth control pills? And the answer is no. There is anecdotal evidence, as I think I even talked about once by mentioning my wife. Sometimes when women have been on the pill for a long period of time, it can take a little longer than you might think for the sort of ovulatory system to kick back into normal. Sometimes it requires treatment with Clomid or another medication, but almost always it fixes it entirely. Long-term effects that are impossible to fix, really not seen. The pill is safe and effective. It's been used by gazillions of women. It works, and it should not be one of these things that people fear because they think it's going to destroy their chance of having children later in life. In fact, that what I just said goes for pretty much all form of birth control, long-acting and not. Next question is, Nick, tell me more about the government's inability to negotiate for lower prescription drug prices with respect to Medicare Part D. This is one of those crazy tragedy stories, or just ridiculousnesses. So one of the reasons that other countries spend far less on medications than we do here in America is because they can negotiate for bulk purchasing. Because a company, when you're buying a ton of something, will often sell it to you at a cheaper price than they would if you were buying small numbers of it. This is true in almost all economies. You know, if you place large orders of anything, you can often get a discount. Why? Because they're assured of making a profit on a huge sale, and they will often cut you a discount. And so if a country says to a drug company, we're buying all the drugs for all the citizens in our country, if a drug company knows if it makes that deal, it gets a huge sale. If it doesn't make the deal, it gets no sale. So they will often cut a big discount. But in the United States, we don't do that. We have tons of purchasers, all of whom are buying for small groups. And that's a real problem, and therefore you can't get this big discount. So when Medicare decided, you know what, we're going to have a Medicare drug program, there was potential to say, we're going to make big purchases for all the seniors in the United States. And they could have really demanded a cheaper price. And that's the free market at work. That's how it works. You know, if you make the bulk purchases, you can get a discount. But of course, Congress, being what Congress is, they specifically wrote into the law, Medicare can't do that. This, of course, directly benefits the drug companies because they won't have to sort of compete for the business. And so Medicare Part D specifically says you can't bulk purchase the drugs, which means that we pay more as taxpayers for the drugs. Seniors pay more for the drugs. It benefits, the drug companies at the expense of everybody else in the United States who has to pay more for those drugs. We could change that tomorrow if we wanted to. It's not going to happen, but that is it in a nutshell. Next question. This isn't even pronounceable, so I'm not going to. Fideblaw. Are doctors of osteopathy DOs as good as regular doctors MDs? I don't know of any studies, but their training is about approximately the same time, and they funnel into the same residency programs and therefore fellowships if they do further training at that point. And so I would say that there's no evidence to say that that's not the case, that they're not as good, and they certainly practice the same way. Then it's very likely you're seeing, many of you, doctors who have DOs as opposed to MDs and you've never known. So it wouldn't be something I'd fixate on. Gabrielle Baum asks, our pediatrician has been very adamant about our 14-month-old drinking whole milk due to high fat requirements for the developing brain. Is this legitimate? At what point is milk no longer beneficial? So this is one of those times when I'm not going to fight with your pediatrician, because remember that technically we advocate that breastfeeding should occur all the way up to almost 2 years of age, and that's whole milk. You're not getting non-fat out of the breast. In fact, I'm convinced that my wife was pumping out high test, we used to call it, because our first son was just enormous, and it was entirely off of originally breastfeeding. So most pediatricians will tell you up to age 2 you should be drinking whole milk. The argument scientifically is that there's a lot of brain development going on and you need all that fat, and especially since we've eliminated fat from almost everything else that we feed children and babies, yes, that's the one source of real fat that they're getting, and so we need it. And when I talk about milk and all the videos and everything else, I'm very clear this does not apply to toddlers, all of whom should be drinking milk up to 2 years of age. After 2, gets a little more debatable. Most people don't say whole milk at that point. We transition kids to low fat or low fat milk, I think, at that point, and of course later to non-fat. But the evidence for pumping milk into kids gets less impressive as they age. So I'm going to still agree with your pediatrician. 14-month-old, not breastfeeding, whole milk is probably decent argument for it. So I would, they're not listening to the hype. That's actually what most pediatricians would agree to at this point. Next question. Amber Fairy Dust, whose name I entirely endorse because it is very easily read and understood. Amber Fairy Dust asks, what's up with food dyes and ADHD? Hoax or just circumstantial? Or is there actually a causational link? Much like sugar, this has been studied. And for the vast majority of children, There is no link between food dyes and behavior and hyperactivity, which is where most of this comes from. However, it's not as strong a negative as it is with sugar, and there are, I think, you can make a stronger case that there might be a subset of kids who react to food dyes in such a way that, limiting them might be okay, but they're small and they're not common. And the idea that red dyes are affecting all children in this way is a total myth. And so, if you're worried about it causing ADHD, no research. If you're worried about, or no evidence. If you're talking about it affecting kids who are otherwise normal and giving them hyperactivity, no evidence. But if you have a child with severe ADHD and you have found that restricting them food in this way makes a difference in their behavior, I'm not going to sit here and argue with you that you're wrong. Go ahead. But I would say that for most people, there's really no reason to try to avoid that kind of stuff. It's not going to make a difference. Next question. B.S. Hayes, 513. Okay, seriously though, why is the lens of the microscope in your To the Research poster shaped like a condom? Wow, okay. All right, I'm going to point it out here. We've never noticed that before. I'm hearing laughter from over here. I don't think that was done on purpose. And I wish you wouldn't tell anyone else about it because we're not redoing that poster. So it's not shaped like a condom. I don't know what you're seeing there. I don't know what's on your mind. Obviously you're thinking about something else, but that was not intentional. Next question, Peter Benson. What kind of evidence studies are there showing support for the idea that pregnant women shouldn't consume certain things as sushi or coffee? Two different questions there. One is the sushi, because what you're getting at, okay, so actually many different questions there. One is the raw fish carrying disease getting there. There's almost no evidence that that's happening. I mean, it's always possible to get infected food. But these days, sushi is amazingly well, usually clean and cared for. And if you're careful about it, you're not going to have any problems. If you're talking about too much mercury, recommendations still exist that certain kinds of fish we shouldn't be consuming in huge amounts because it has mercury in it. It's not even good for people, let alone for fetuses. And so, watching fish intake for that reason makes sense. Coffee is all about the caffeine. And so there are some epidemiologic studies which show that, drinking coffee or getting a lot of caffeine can be linked to higher risk of a pregnancy problem or losing a pregnancy. That evidence is super weak. It's just not strong. But since we in America certainly like to believe that we can get risk down to zero, you will see a lot of women who will give up coffee and caffeine while they're pregnant. It's just not that strong. In fact, coffee is shockingly healthy. I'm writing a piece right now that's going to be in the Upshot in a week or two, going through the evidence on coffee, and I've been blown away by the amount of evidence that shows that it's actually beneficial, not even not harmful, but good. So I think we've been overreacting to coffee, but more of that to come. I'm sure after I write that, we'll wind up doing a piece on healthcare triage about it as well. Next question. Miori, how good is the research on vegan lifestyles and their health benefits? Not very. Look, I'm not going to dispute, probably most vegans eat pretty healthily because you're eliminating tons of bad stuff in the diet and a lot of processed foods when you adopt a vegan lifestyle. But proving that vegan is better than vegetarian or that either is better than a healthy, well-rounded, including animal protein diet, there's not much evidence for that at all. And so I just wrote a piece this week on the New York Times about food rules and what maybe we should have as recommended, at least what my recommendations would be for what people should eat. And these are the kinds of things that go off the rails. We should not be lecturing each other on what to eat. What works for you is a very individual thing. Some people do awesome with a vegan diet. Some people do awesome with a paleo diet. Some people do awesome with an Atkins diet. Some people do awesome with just a well-balanced but calorie mindful diet. They're all great, and they're all better than eating unhealthily. And fixating on these minutiae and demonizing certain things and attacking other people is unproductive. And it doesn't do us much good at all, and it's certainly not leading to great results. So I caution against that. Next question. Charlotte Rosenfield, any perspective of genetic counseling and the importance of proactive genetic testing? I'm assuming you're asking about with having babies. And this is where, like we run up against where it's like, you don't want to anger anyone certainly watching Healthcare Triage. So the reason we do genetic testing is obviously so people can make more informed choices. Sometimes that's about whether or not people want to even try to have babies. Sometimes that's about once they are pregnant, sort of making preparations if problems arise. And sometimes, if we're being totally honest, that's about if people want to abort or terminate a pregnancy after they have found out certain results. Those are incredibly personal questions. I don't have advice in the sense that I can only speak to what my wife and I would do, but that's about what my wife and I would do. Some people believe that you have a child no matter what's coming, and that's totally their choice. Some people are more proactive about making choices with pregnancies and what they would consider tolerable or not. Those are their choices too. But that is why people often do genetic testing or genetic counseling, so that they can make more informed choices that work best for them. And that's probably the way that medicine should go. Next question. Vortelex the Druid. Is aspartame as harmful as everyone says? Now, come on, we have a Healthcare Triage episode on this. It's one of our most popular episodes. Is artificial sweeteners harmful? So, you didn't watch it? The answer is no. It's not as harmful as everyone says. But you're missing an awesome episode that has a phenomenal study on it where they took these monkeys and they fed them shockingly huge amount of artificial sweeteners every day for 19 years. And who dedicates their life to that kind of research? We should know about that scientist and we should salute them. And you should go watch the video right now on artificial sweeteners, because the answer is no. They're not that harmful. N Kicker says or asks, does your opposition to the milk industrial complex apply to soy milk, almond milk, and coconut milk too? Those are not milk. Milk comes out of an animal. Almond milk is not milk. It's a fake beverage made from almonds that we've made to look like milk so that the people who are not able to drink the animal milk can feel like they're getting milk. Nobody needs the milk. No one needs the milk. Soy milk, same thing. Almond milk, same. Coconut milk, these are all ways of approximating the taste of milk for people that either can't tolerate the cow's milk, won't drink it because they're vegans or vegetarians. That's what it's about. You don't need any of it. None. It's just if you like it. Now, if you like it and you're drinking because you like it, so be it. This is America. I'm totally fine with that. If you love the sweet, sweet taste of almond milk in your cereal, fine. But there's no benefits to this. I'm being told, I believe, we're running out of time. So I'm going to, are we running out of time?
Like 10 minutes.
Oh, no, then we're fine. Okay, then we're not up there, so I can keep going. Next is Anna is keeping calm. Good for you, Anna. Why is there a lack of effective treatments for chronic fatigue? Okay. Partially, this is because it's very hard to study chronic fatigue. There's no clear classification on what is chronic fatigue. It's not like we have a blood test for it or a radiologic test. So there's lots of different people calling lots of different things chronic fatigue, which makes it very hard to standardize it so that we can actually do research. The second is that we have no sense yet of what causes it. And if we don't know what causes it, it makes it very hard to treat it. And so there's a huge sort of black box when it comes to chronic fatigue that we have very little understanding of. And we're sort of in those early stages that makes it difficult to diagnose it and acknowledge it and understand it, let alone to develop a treatment. So if you have it, if you know people that have it, advocate for it. Advocate for research. That's what we need. We need research. Next question comes from Kimi123. How does the U.S. deal with the regulation of supplementary medicines? For example, hunger control medicines used traditionally but lacking evidence. We did a Healthcare Triage News on this just a couple weeks ago. You should go watch that. We don't regulate the supplements very well. We don't regulate them at all. As we pointed out in that Healthcare Triage News episode, they did this study that showed that like they did a random selection of like supplements in certain stores and found that none of them contained pretty much like any of the stuff that they were supposed to. And they were full of things like, dried asparagus and crushed up houseplant, none of the good stuff. So how do we deal with the regulation of supplement medicines? We don't. We don't. So we don't necessarily regulate them. And the FDA, and ironically enough, the FDA just the last 2 days was conducting sort of hearings or public listening groups on homeopathy to actually look at whether or not it works. And a lot of this stuff just isn't studied, isn't regulated. And of course, if it's not studied or regulated, then we have no idea if it works, which is why I'm not so keen on supplements. It turns out I skipped a question. I apologize. We're going back. Vrug. Maybe if Vrug had a name I could pronounce, I would have not missed him. But ibuprofen versus paracetamol. Oh, wow, you must be British. Because what you're asking is ibuprofen versus acetaminophen, basically. Tylenol or ibuprofen for sore throat from a common cold. Doesn't matter that much. I've read that ibuprofen increases the average length of a cold. I don't believe that that's true. Okay, ibuprofen, Tylenol. This is always the debate. So there have been head-to-head randomized controlled trials of this. For many things, no difference. They both work. Let's start with that. They both work. But they are different medications. Ibuprofen appears in some cases to work slightly better on fever than does Tylenol. But having said that, use either one. But ibuprofen is also an anti-inflammatory. And Tylenol or acetaminophen or how do you guys say that? Paracetamol is not an anti-inflammatory. It does not have that property. So for many things, ibuprofen can work for swelling, for pain, in certain ways that Tylenol just can't, or acetaminophen just can't, because one has sort of anti-inflammatory properties and the other doesn't. So if you're also looking for an anti-inflammatory property, ibuprofen. And there are reasons, therefore, that for certain things, ibuprofen will outperform acetaminophen. So I personally reach for the ibuprofen more often. Now, ibuprofen has some side effects that acetaminophen does not. It is much more likely to cause gastric distress. High doses for long periods of time has been linked to ulcers more commonly than acetaminophen doesn't. But again, that's usually high, and it causes belly pain in certain people. Having said that, you got to take it in pretty high doses for a period of time. Talk to your doctor always before making kinds of drug decisions. Do not take medical advice from YouTube, including me. Talk to your doctor. I'm just giving you sort of the summation of what the research shows. Next question is Kimi123. How does the U.S. deal with the oh my God, I already did that one. I apologize because we did that one already. So now next question. Luke Coomer. I've noticed tons of food or loads of food seem to contain a huge amount of saturated fat. What are the negative health benefits? Controversial. There is some epidemiologic evidence that consuming large amounts of saturated fat is not good for you. It can be linked to heart disease. It can also be linked to cholesterol levels, which can then be linked to heart disease. But there are people that will fight this. They will argue that still what you're seeing does not bear out in randomized controlled trials or prospective trials. And that given that like almost everything we found in epidemiologic evidence with nutrition seems to be wrong when we actually do prospective trials, that you should not believe even this. Having said all of that, I probably watch, saturated fat. I try not to eat too much of it. I don't try to avoid fat necessarily per se, but there is the evidence against saturated fat is stronger than the evidence against fat. There are lots of people though that'll eat paleo diets or Atkins diets and tell me I'm wrong. There are lots of nutrition experts and nutrition writers and science writers who I've debated with and talked to who completely disagree with me, and I don't think they're necessarily, they're not wrong in the same way that I don't think I'm wrong. We need better data. And so until that better data is there, I can only tell you what I do, which is probably not eat too much saturated fat, but you can find lots of nutrition experts who will disagree. We have time for one more question. So Ben Stanley gets lucky, and he's the last one. I just picked him out. Eczema, what works and what doesn't? Eczema is also called like atopic dermatitis. It's basically when your skin is almost reacting. Boy, I'm really peeling from my recent trip to Jamaica, and I did not see that until just now. Regardless, and always wear sunscreen, and I did. Eczema is atopic dermatitis. It is a sort of chronic condition that people get when it's sort of like autoimmune, and your skin just reacts to stuff, even to like your own self. and you develop sort of what dermatitis or an inflammation of the skin, and it's bothersome because it can really be nasty and it can really bother people, and it's chronic, and it's related to asthma and lots of other atopic diseases, but what works and what doesn't. Usually it can be treated with the mainstays of moisturizer, sometimes with a topical steroid. The key thing you gotta do is moisturize, moisturize, and moisturize. And when you do moisturize, I don't mean like those lotions which get absorbed in the skin and go away instantly. The stuff you can't stand, the really thick stuff that coats it, that works like a barrier, your Aquaphors, your Eucerins, the really thick ointments. Apply that a couple times a day, especially right after you get out of bath and the shower. Sometimes that is coupled with steroid creams, which should be used more sparingly, hydrocortisone, things like that. And so their use is really what works. And sometimes people who have really refractive disease need higher level steroids or other kinds of stuff. So be it, again, you should talk to your doctor. You and your doctor need to make those calls about what you should do. Do not take health advice from YouTube, including me. But the mainstays of therapy, moisturizer, topical steroids. So the next Healthcare Triage Live is going to be next Wednesday, April 29th at 11:30 Eastern. Link will be down below in the description. Please tune in. Also, please leave your comments in the next video comment section. Don't continue to leave them in today's video comment section. We might not see them. Leave them in next video's comment section when the link goes up. The link will be available later on today and throughout the week, leading right up until next week when we go live once again. Leave your comments and your questions in that video's comment section, and we will be addressing them next time. Thanks for tuning into Healthcare Triage Live. Hey, by the way, subscribe to Real Healthcare Triage, regular Healthcare Triage. This is all Real Healthcare Triage. Subscribe to regular Healthcare Triage. Tell everyone about how awesome this is. We're trying to build viewership as always and trying to get out there, tell as many people the truth as we can. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next week.